Thousands of years ago, long before the pyramids or the pharaohs, people began to settle along the banks of the Nile River. Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, flooding every year and leaving behind rich black soil that made farming possible early. Egyptians learned to grow wheat, barley, and flax, and they raised cattle, sheep, and goats. They built small villages and learned to make pottery tools and simple boats. Over time, these villages grew into larger communities and people began to organize themselves into tribes and small kingdoms. By around 3100 BC, a powerful king named Narmer, also known as Menes, united Upper and Lower Egypt into one kingdom, became the first pharaoh, and wore the double crown as a symbol of unity. This was the beginning of the world's first great civilization. The Old Kingdom began around 2700 BC and lasted for about 500 years. This era is sometimes called the Age of the Pyramids because it was during this time that the Egyptians built the famous pyramids. At Gizeh, the pharaohs were seen as gods on earth and ruled with absolute power. They commanded thousands of workers to build massive tombs that would last forever. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the largest and most famous of all. It was built with more than 2 million stone blocks and stood as the tallest structure in the world for thousands of years. Nearby, the mysterious Sphinx, with the body of a lion and the head of a pharaoh, guarded the pyramids. Egyptian society was highly organized. At the top was the pharaoh, followed by priests, noble scribes, and craftsmen. Most people were farmers who worked the land and paid taxes in the form of crops. Slavery existed, but most workers were free peasants. The Egyptians developed a system of writing called hieroglyphics, which used pictures and symbols to record stories, laws, and religious texts. They wrote on papyrus made from reeds that grew along the Nile. Egyptian art was colorful and full of meaning. They painted scenes of daily life, gods, and the afterlife on the walls of tombs and temples. Religion was at the center of Egyptian life. Egyptians believed in many gods and goddesses who controlled every part of the world. Ra, the sun god, was the most important. Osiris was the god of the afterlife, and Isis was his wife. The Egyptians believed that after death, the soul would travel to the underworld and be judged by Osiris. If the heart was pure, the soul would live forever in the field of reeds. To prepare for the afterlife, the Egyptians developed the process of mummification. They removed the organs, dried the body with salt, and wrapped it in linen. Mummy was placed in a decorated coffin and buried with food, jewelry, and treasures for the journey to the Zionis next world. The Old Kingdom was a time of great achievement, but also of challenges. Building the pyramids required huge amounts of resources and labor. Sometimes the Nile did not flood enough, and there were famines. Over time, the power of the pharaohs weakened, and local governors called nomarchs became more powerful. By around 2200 BC, the Old Kingdom collapsed, and Egypt entered a period of chaos known as the First Intermediate Period. But the story of Egypt was far from over. A new era was about to begin after the fall of the Old Kingdom. Egypt entered a time of chaos and division known as the First Intermediate Period. Local rulers and governors fought for power, and the country was split into many small kingdoms. But around 2050 BC, a strong leader named Mentuhotep II from Thebes reunited Egypt and began the Middle Kingdom. This era lasted for about 400 years and is remembered as a time of stability and growth. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom worked to restore order, rebuild temples, and encourage trade with neighboring lands. They built new irrigation systems to control the Nile floods and expanded farmland. The capital moved to Thebes, and the pharaohs were seen as wise and caring rulers. Art and literature flourished, and Egyptian stories and poems from this time are still read today. The Middle Kingdom was also a time of exploration and contact with other cultures. Egyptian traders traveled to Nubia in the south to get gold, ivory, and exotic animals. They sailed to the land of Punt to bring back incense, myrrh, and rare woods. The pharaohs built great fortresses along Egypt's borders to protect against invaders. But over time, the power of the pharaohs weakened again, and foreign invaders known as the Hyksos took control of northern Egypt. The Hyksos brought new technologies such as the horse and chariot, which changed Egyptian warfare forever. For about 100 years, Egypt was divided until a prince from Thebes named Ahmose led a rebellion and drove out the Hyksos. He became the first pharaoh of the New Kingdom, and Egypt entered its greatest age. The New Kingdom began around 1550 BC and lasted for nearly 500 years. This was the time of Egypt's most famous pharaohs and its greatest power. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom built huge temples and monuments that still stand today. They expanded Egypt's borders through war and diplomacy, making it the richest and most powerful nation in the ancient world. The capital city of Thebes was filled with grand palaces and temples dedicated to the gods. One of the first great pharaohs of the New Kingdom was Hatshepsut. She was one of the few women to rule Egypt as pharaoh, and she wore the false beard and royal crown. Just like a man, Hatshepsut was a strong and successful ruler who built magnificent temples and sent trading expeditions to distant lands. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari is one of the wonders of ancient Egypt. After her death, her stepson Thutmose III became pharaoh and led Egypt's armies to victory in many battles. He is sometimes called the Napoleon of Egypt because of his military genius. Another famous pharaoh was Akhenaten, who tried to change Egypt's religion. He worshipped only one god, the sun disk Aten, and built a new capital city called Akhetaten. His wife Nefertiti was known for her beauty, and her famous bust is one of the most recognized works of ancient art. After Akhenaten's death, the old gods returned and the capital moved back to Thebes. Perhaps the most famous pharaoh of all was Tutankhamun. Became king as a boy and ruled for only a short time. His tomb was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter and was filled with incredible treasures. The golden mask of Tutankhamun is a symbol of ancient Egypt around the world. Although he was not a powerful ruler, his tomb is the best preserved ever found and has taught us much about Egyptian life and beliefs. The greatest pharaoh of the New Kingdom was Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. He ruled for more than 60 years and built more temple statues and monuments than any other. Pharaoh Ramses fought many battles, especially against the Hittites at the famous Battle of Kadesh. Signed one of the world's first peace treaties, and his reign was a time of prosperity and power. The temples at Abu Simbel and the Ramesseum are among his greatest achievements. Religion continued to play a central role in Egyptian life. The Egyptians believed in many gods and goddesses and built huge temples to honor them. Priests performed daily rituals and festivals to keep the gods happy. The afterlife was still very important, and the Valley of the Kings became the burial place for pharaohs, and nobles' tombs were filled with treasures and magical spells to help the dead reach the next world. The New Kingdom was a time of glory but also of challenges. Egypt faced invasions from the Sea Peoples and other enemies. Cost of war and building projects put a strain on the economy. Over time, the power of the pharaohs declined, and Egypt entered another period of weakness known as the Third Intermediate Period. But The legacy of the Middle and New Kingdoms lived on in the temples, tombs, and stories that have survived for thousands of years after the glory of the New Kingdom. Egypt entered a long period of decline and foreign rule. The power of the pharaohs weakened and local rulers fought for control. This time is known as the Third Intermediate Period, and it lasted for several centuries. Egypt was divided into smaller kingdoms and often invaded by neighbors from the south and east. The priests of Amun and Thebes became very powerful and sometimes ruled as kings themselves. Meanwhile, new groups like the Libyans and Nubians gained influence in Egypt. The Nubian kings from the south even conquered Egypt and ruled as the 25th dynasty. They tried to restore the old traditions and built temples in the style of the great pharaohs, but soon new invaders arrived from the east. In the 7th century BC, the Assyrians invaded Egypt and captured the city of Thebes. They ruled for a short time, but were soon replaced by the Persians. Persian Empire was one of the largest in the world, and Egypt became one of its provinces. The Persians allowed the Egyptians to keep many of their customs, but the pharaohs were now governors under the Persian king. There were several revolts against Persian rule, but they were all crushed for almost 200 years. Egypt was part of the Persian Empire. In 332 BC, a new conqueror arrived in Egypt. His name was Alexander the Great, and he was the king of Macedonia in Greece. Alexander defeated the Persians and marched into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator. He founded the city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean coast, which became one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. Alexandria was famous for its great library, its lighthouse, and its mix of Greek, Egyptian, and other cultures. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy became ruler of Egypt and started the Ptolemaic dynasty. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt for almost 300 years. They built temples in the old style, but also brought Greek language and customs to Egypt. The Ptolemies were often at war with each other and with other kingdoms in the Mediterranean. The last and most famous ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty was Cleopatra VII. She was intelligent, ambitious, and spoke several languages. Cleopatra tried to keep Egypt independent by forming alliances with powerful Roman leaders like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her story is full of drama, romance, and tragedy. After the defeat of Antony and Cleopatra by the Roman Emperor Augustus, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire in 30 BC. These marked the end of the age of the pharaohs and the beginning of a new era under Roman rule. Egypt remained an important and wealthy land. The Romans admired Egyptian culture, and many Roman emperors visited the temples and monuments of the Nile. Alexandria continued to be a center of learning and trade. But over time, the old religion faded, and Christianity spread throughout Egypt. By the 4th century, most Egyptians had become Christians, and the ancient temples were closed. In the 7th century, a new force arrived in Egypt. Arab armies conquered the land and brought Islam with them. Cairo was founded as the new capital and quickly grew into one of the greatest cities in the world. Egypt became a center of Islamic learning, art, and architecture. The great mosques and markets of Cairo are still famous today. For centuries, Egypt was ruled by different Islamic dynasties, including the Fatimids, the Ayyubids under Saladin, and the Mamluks. Mamluks were slave soldiers who rose to power and ruled Egypt for hundreds of years. They built beautiful mosques, schools, and palaces, and defended Egypt against the Mongols and Crusaders. In 1517, Egypt was conquered by the Ottoman Turks and became part of the Ottoman Empire. the Ottomans ruled Egypt for more than 300 years. During this time, Egypt was an important province but was often neglected by the sultans in Istanbul local. Rulers called beys and pashas held real power and sometimes acted as independent kings. The people of Egypt continued to farm the land trade along the Nile and built their own traditions. In the late 18th century, a new era began when the French general Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. Although the French stayed only a few years, their scholars studied the ancient monuments and discovered the Rosetta Stone, which helped unlock the secrets of hieroglyphics. After the French left, a powerful leader named Muhammad Ali took control of Egypt, modernized the army, built factories, and tried to make Egypt strong and independent. His family ruled Egypt for more than 100 years. In the 19th century, Egypt became important to European powers because of its location and the Suez Canal. Suez Canal was built in 1869 and connected the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, making trade between Europe and Asia much faster. Britain and France competed for control of Egypt, and in 1882, the British took over Egypt, became a British protectorate, and the people struggled for independence. In the early 20th century, Egyptians began to demand freedom from foreign rule. There were protests, strikes, and revolutions. Finally, in 1952, a group of army officers, led by Gamal Abdel Nasser, overthrew the king and declared Egypt a republic. Nasser became a hero in the Arab world and tried to modernize Egypt, nationalized the Suez Canal, which led to a crisis with Britain, France, and Israel. Egypt played a leading role in the politics of the Middle East and fought several wars with Israel. After Nasser's death, Egypt was ruled by Anwar Sadat and then Hosni Mubarak. Sadat made peace with Israel in 1979, but was later assassinated. Mubarak ruled for nearly 30 years until he was overthrown during the Arab Spring in 2011. Since then, Egypt has faced many challenges, but remains one of the most important countries in the Arab world. The story of ancient Egypt ended long ago, but its legacy lives on. The pyramids, temples, and tombs still stand as a reminder of a great civilization. The art, writing, and ideas of the Egyptians have influenced people around the world for thousands of years. From the time of the pharaohs to the present day, Egypt has always been a land of mystery and wonder. The story of Egypt in the modern era begins in the 19th century, as the world was changing rapidly. After centuries of Ottoman rule, Egypt was ruled by Muhammad Ali, who was often called the founder of modern Egypt. He reformed the army, built new schools and factories, and tried to make Egypt strong and independent. His family, known as the Muhammad Ali dynasty, ruled Egypt for more than 100 years. During this time, Egypt became more connected to Europe and the wider world. Suez Canal was built in 1869, linking the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea and making Egypt a crossroads of global trade. The canal brought wealth and attention, but also made Egypt a target for foreign powers. In the late 19th century, European countries, especially Britain and France, became more involved in Egyptian affairs. Egypt fell into debt, and in 1882, the British Army occupied the country. Although Egypt remained officially part of the Ottoman Empire, the British controlled its government and economy. Egyptians began to demand more rights and independence. There were protests, strikes, and nationalist movements. Writers, poets, and intellectuals called for freedom and reform. In 1919, a major revolution broke out, and Egyptians from all walks of life joined together to demand independence. In 1922, Britain declared Egypt an independent kingdom, but British influence remained strong. The early 20th century was a time of change and hope. Cairo became a center of art, music, and learning. Egyptian cinema flourished, and the city was known as the Hollywood of the Middle East. But political life was unstable, and there were frequent changes of government. The king and the parliament often disagreed, and the British still controlled the Suez Canal and much of the economy. Many Egyptians felt that true independence had not yet been achieved. After World War II, the desire for real freedom grew stronger. In 1952, a group of young army officers known as the Free Officers led a revolution and overthrew King Pharaoh. They ended the monarchy and declared Egypt a republic. Gamal Abdel Nasser became the leader of Egypt and a hero across the Arab world. Nasser wanted to modernize Egypt and make it a leader among Arab nations. Nationalized the Suez Canal in 1956, which led to a crisis with Britain, France, and Israel. Egypt fought several wars with Israel and played a central role in the politics of the Middle East. Nasser built the Aswan High Dam to control the Nile and provide electricity, but the project also caused problems for farmers and the environment. After Nasser's death in 1970, Anwar Sadat became president. Sadat made bold moves to change Egypt's direction. He opened the economy to foreign investment and made peace with Israel in 1979. This was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country, and it changed the region forever. Sadat was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize but was later assassinated by extremists who opposed his policies. Hosni Mubarak became president after Sadat and ruled Egypt for nearly 30 years. Mubarak kept tight control over politics and the media, but also worked to keep Egypt stable and at peace. Many Egyptians grew frustrated with corruption, unemployment, and lack of freedom in 2011. Inspired by protests in Tunisia and across the Arab world, Egyptians took to the streets in massive numbers. They demanded democracy, justice, and a better life. After 18 days of protests, Mubarak resigned, and Egypt entered a new era. The years after the Arab Spring were full of hope and uncertainty. Egypt held its first free elections, and Mohamed Morsi became the first democratically elected president. But political divisions and economic problems led to more unrest. In 2013, the army removed Morsi from power and Abdel Fattah el-Sisi became president. Since then, Egypt has faced many challenges, including terrorism, economic struggles, and debates over human rights. But the country has also seen new roads, bridges, and cities being built. Cairo has grown into a huge metropolis with millions of people. Tourists from around the world come to see the pyramids, temples, and museums. Egypt's rich history continues to attract scholars and adventurers. Today, Egypt is a country of contrasts. Ancient monuments stand beside modern skyscrapers. Traditional markets are filled with the sounds of cell phones and car horns. The Nile still flows through the heart of the country, bringing life to the land. Egyptians are proud of their heritage and hopeful for the future. They celebrate their culture through music, food, festivals, and family traditions. Young people use social media to connect with the world and share their dreams. Egypt faces many challenges in the 21st century. Population growth puts pressure on resources and jobs. Climate change threatens the Nile and the land, but Egyptians have always been resilient and creative. They have survived wars, invasions, and revolutions for thousands of years. The spirit of the pharaohs lives on in the hearts of the people. As Egypt moves forward into the future, it remains a bridge between Africa, Asia, and Europe. It is a land of mystery, beauty, and endless stories. From the first farmers on the banks of the Nile to the bustling streets of Cairo, Today, Egypt's journey is one of change, survival, and hope. Story of Egypt is far from over. Each new generation writes its own chapter in the history of this ancient and remarkable land.